time, or our lectures are live streamed. If you wish to send the link for any of your friends or family, don't hesitate to do that. It is on HIPAA YouTube channel, and it will stay there forever if you want to revise something or also send it to someone. All our lectures are permanently saved in our YouTube channel. Don't forget, please, to take your certificate before leaving. After the lecture, we will distribute all the certificates and we will have a group photo. I wish you a wonderful lecture. Thank you very much.
Hello. Are you able to hear me? People at the back? Perfect. So I am Sachin Ramdas. I am a time-lapse photographer based in Dubai. This is something I have been doing for the last 9 years, doing time-lapses rather obsessively, relentlessly. I'm so glad to be here right now at this venue with so many good people, talented people right here. And it's a privilege for me to share my knowledge from whatever I've learned over the years with all of you. And let's create a lot of new time lapses in the future for this. So before I go ahead and talk more about the time lapse, I would like to just showcase one of my recent works with you, which was based on Dubai. So shall I just give it a go? After that, we will continue with the lecture. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much. So this picture took me over 3 years, nearly 3 years, simply because you had to wait for a lot of climatic conditions to come right and to get a lot of permissions. That's what took it so long. What you see right now would be around 150,000 images taken over 3 years, and it was shot from over 70 locations across Dubai. So that is the gist on what this project is all about. And I think the storage and the whole capacity of this project is around 6 TB, so which is quite a large capacity for me to store and render over a long period of time. So this whole lecture, right? Am I going out of? It's all right, yeah. So so we will be speaking today more on the basis of this work, because this I think is a good work of mine. So I think it's only fair for me to speak on the basis of this work. So can we go ahead with this? Yeah. That's okay. Right. So how I came into time lapse, it was purely by accident. In fact, my foray into photography itself was completely by accident. I was supposed to cover an event in India where my family was going to India for a vacation, and there was a photographer who was supposed to cover an event. But he backed out because he was sick, and that was the moment back in 2012 when I decided that I might as well buy a camera and go to India to do some still photography. I had no clue on photography at that point in time. So what really happened was that I went to India, took a lot of pictures, didn't impress anybody. It was really bad. I came back, and but that at that time I knew some Photoshop, so I sort of like hid my mistakes by using Photoshop because my pictures were that bad. So that was my first experiments with photography, and my first camera at that time was a Canon 600D. So for the next few months, I tried to sort of explore more on photography and more of Photoshop because I was quite good at Photoshop and I was really bad at photography. So I tried to sort of offset one negative with another positive, and that was going on well till I submitted some of my images. I realized that it is very important for a photographer when he's shooting to shoot it right, as in no Photoshop, no nothing, just shoot it right. That is when I started developing a work ethic where I would research on what I'm going to shoot and how I will shoot it, and I'll make sure that that is the best outcome of that particular shoot. So these were some of my initial projects. My initial projects were something with portrait photography and landscape photography, and a lot of experimentation at night. You know, you go to the beaches, you go to the streets, you go to the building rooftops, and I stay in Fujairah. So Fujairah is rather a not so explored emirate at that point in time. It was back in 2012, right? Uh, so I was one of the first few guys in Fujairah who was trying their hands at photography, right? So it really helped me because a lot of people in Fujairah started encouraging me for what I was doing, and that gave me a boost to venture furthermore. So this is few of the things which I felt happens when you start into photography and into time lapse for that matter. First of all, no one believes you when you start out photography because people think that you're not going to be any good, and I faced that a lot when I started out. New equipment, a lot of the people tell you that you need to get better lenses, better cameras, better equipment, and that will translate into better films, which is totally not true. So these are some of the things which I've encountered when I moved into photography. I will get into time lapse, but hear me out. When I started working out, there were some laughable budgets. People would offer you a few things like this is the budget for this shoot, and you need to do it. And as a beginner in the industry, you had no clue on how to tackle that, and you almost always ended up getting the wrong share of the bargain. Offers of exposure where they say that exposure will give you a lot of gigs, which is again not true. General lack of motivation. You really have no idea where you're going to, and that really brought me down. It was a very dark time in my life, and comparison to your peers, because right now we are in a very social media driven society that we keep measuring the work based on the likes and the shares and how many articles got reshared, things like that. But at the end of the day, what I've learned over the years is that uh, what really matters is, does your work give you a good night's sleep at the end of the day? If your work is making you happy at the end of the day, then you are doing all right. You don't need to compare with anyone else. And that thought process gave me a lot of happiness later on. So, so how did I fight back? It's through my experience. I think all of us here are artists by heart, and we are here for the experience, to experience art, to create new art, to be out there, to come up with something new. And too many times we forget that we are here to create art. When we create art, I think that itself is a reward for it. You do not need likes or shares or reshares or whatever. It is important to be grateful for who you are as an artist, because you are blessed. All of you in this room are blessed with a quality that you are able to create. It's not an easy quality to have. You are here and you are all blessed to create. You can create art. It's important to have a support system. Mine would be close friends, family. That's pretty much it. When you do time lapses, most of the people will try to ignore you simply because you're out of the house for a good part of the time. So that's pretty much what my support system was. And one important part for me was, in the Middle East or in Asia, there were no real time lapses at that time back in 2012. So the only people at that time who did time lapses were some Americans based in New York and San Francisco. And these were the only content that was available online. So when I started out in 2012, they were the only people that I had the option of looking at. There were no one else, and they were doing a great job, right? At that point, I would go ahead and say that I learned from some of the very best in the industry right now, and I'm proud of that fact. So my workflow, my work ethic is pretty much what they also follow. Uh, so what is a time lapse? I'm sure you are all here to hear about time lapse. So what exactly is a time lapse? In simple terms, time lapse is a technique where you take a lot of pictures of a particular scene over a large period of time, and what you are essentially trying to show is how that scene has changed over a period of time. It is a lot of drama, it is a lot of change, and that is what time lapse is really good at. It shows drama in one hand, and it also shows the change, how it has transitioned from one state to another. Most of the time, if you start time lapsing from 4 a.m., your time lapse might end at 7 p.m. By that time, the sun would have gone down, the traffic would have come up, and it would be really dark. So you see an incredible change in the whole ecosystem right around you. And that is what time lapse is really good at. It shows that change. So what was the beginning of the time lapse? I mean, some of those are just facts, but from my initial reading, what the time lapse was initially started by Mr. Edward Muybridge there. So he wanted to basically see if, when horses are running, which of these legs are in the air at any given time. Is it 1, 3, 2, 4? So he wanted to know the sequence. So what he did was, he kept an array of cameras from point A to point B, and when the horses were running, these cameras were triggering. And he sort of like brought together all these pictures, and he looked at it. And that was like the first real time lapse in the world. And then it was implemented in a feature film. But the most important time lapse, and probably the Bible for most of the time lapse artists these days, would be Koyaanisqatsi by Godfrey Reggio. This film was really unique because at that time you never really had a mainstream time lapse going on. And what this very famous director, what he did was, that entire film is silent, by the way. There is music, but it's all about images. It's about city. It's about moon rising over the buildings. And what it shows is, it's showing imbalance, how it's showing the imbalance of the rich and the poor. It's showing the imbalance of our society as a whole. And that's what the whole film was all about. And this is taken as like the Bible by pretty much all the time lapses around. In fact, two of the shots in my film, which you just saw, was actually an inspiration from this film. So a lot of the time lapses revisit that work by Godfrey Reggio. If you haven't seen it, try watching it. Modern day time lapse. Now, modern day time lapse, I think all of us are quite blessed, is simply because of the fact that the digital medium as such, the cameras that we use, or the equipment, or just the post processing that we have right now, the power of that is quite good, right? You have a normal time lapse which is mounted on a tripod, and you also have a motion control time lapse which has like a 10 feet rig, and it automatically goes and shoots a time lapse on its own. You have hyperlapses, you have aerial lapses, you have all kinds of things these days. And that to me is a wonderful time to be in, is simply because of the fact that all of you actually at this point in time could choose your own type of time lapse. You do not need to depend on any one type of time lapse. And I think that's a blessing, because all of us can have our own identity and signature. So moving on, why is time lapse fascinating? I've been thinking about this point for the longest time. It's simply because of the fact that why do I keep going back to shooting time lapses? I've always come to a couple of words actually. It's speed and drama. That's for sure. It's there by default. Time lapse makes you look at speed and drama. But more than anything else, I think if God views the world from up above, I think the world will look like a time lapse. Because for him, the time is a different concept. I'm sure it is a different concept. It's fast forward. It doesn't follow like how we follow time. It's fast, it's magical. So that is what I feel it is. Element of unknown. Now, I've had this presentation a couple of days back, and one of the questions that I got from a student was, how is time-lapse different from stop motion? Now, it is a valid question because most of you would have seen stop motion films. Personally, I think the difference between a time-lapse and the stop motion is that stop motion is generally done in a very controlled environment. You know what is the next frame. But in time-lapse, most of the time, we have no idea what we are shooting at. We go to a location, 60% of the time, yes, we know this is the frame. But would a crane come in? Would the rain come in? Would clouds enter from somewhere? Would there be a lot of wind that evening? We can try to predict, but most of the time we can't. So 40% of the time, it's unknown. And that's a luck factor also. If you're really lucky, you would just get it. And I remember there was a time lapse. I wouldn't want to name him. So he was shooting the New Year parade at one of the buildings. So he was shooting the Burj Khalifa. So I think that was the night when I think Address Hotel had a fire. He just ended up at the right place at the right time, and he was the only guy in the world who ended up getting a time lapse of the fire of the Address Hotel. And he sold it to BBC and CNN. He made lots of money. He didn't plan for that fire. He just ended up at the right place at the right time. And the guy became famous overnight. He was all over the news. He was on Russian Times, CNN, BBC, you name it. He was there. Right after that, he launched a complete website where he started selling his stock footage, and he's one of the most popular stock footage time-lapse artists right now. So that is what I've been telling about the element of the unknown. It is a very unknown thing that we are dealing with, and most of the time that is it's exhilarating in a way. It's a richer substitute of a video. This is more on a technical scale. Again, it's a question which I get from students most of the time. They say that, why don't you fast forward a video? Why do you need to take pictures? You might as well fast forward a video. The reason I tell them is that it is not the same, because a video in a second takes 24 frames. A time lapse in a second takes 1 frame. So a time lapse inherently is probably much 24 times, let's say, faster than a video. So, and in the name called time lapse, in the 2 words called time lapse, there is something called lapse, which says you are missing out on something. So in a video, you don't miss out on anything. You shoot something like that. If I shoot this room, I would see all your emotions. Even if I fast forward it up, I would see all your emotions. But if I do a time lapse of the same room, I would take a picture now. Maybe after 3 seconds, I'll take a picture again. What happened between these 2 seconds, I don't get it. And that is the beauty of time lapse. You don't get everything, and that is a trade-off. So if you want to have everything in your footage, take a video. Time-lapse is not for you. But if you want a more dynamic, more dramatic sort of video, a visual, time-lapse is your answer for that. So these are some of the questions that I usually get in a workshop. Now, how to make a time-lapse film? It is easy. People have told me that your job is to take a tripod, take a camera, take an intervalometer, stand on top of a rooftop, and just press the button, right? And stay there for 2 hours. You get a time lapse. But life and time lapse as such isn't that easy. It's simply because of the fact that you can get a sequence that way, but if you want a film, you need probably around 60 to 70 sequences where you need to do a lot of research. You need to research the weather conditions. You need to research who's going to be where. Like most of these towers that you have seen in my film required a permission. It's nice and easy to see this, but some of the towers over there, it took me 3 months to get a permission from the management. Now, this is your biggest enemy when it comes to time lapse. Most of the locations that you want to shoot from are restricted, prohibited, could be a private property. So how do you get around that? And most of the time, you're not going to have a budget. None of you are going to have a $100,000 budget to get a time lapse. You will be having a few thousands of dollars at the max, some equipment, and a couple of friends to help you out. That's pretty much it for most of you. And when I started out, I had a friend who knew some people because he used to work with them. He helped me a lot to get a lot of these rooftops. And that's exactly how we all need to work to get a time lapse up and running. So how I do when it comes to time lapse is I do have a very strong pre-production. Now, without a strong pre-production, your production as well as the post-production is not going to hold up. It's simply because of the fact that time lapse is probably a 1 to 3 year commitment. If you are not ready to spend that much time on a project, then this time lapse is not for you. And that is a fact, because there have been days when I stay in Fujairah. So for me to drive to Dubai, it's nearly 2 hours, let's say. So how it worked for all those fog sequences there, I would message my friend in Dubai. I would ask him, can you look at the atmosphere and the sky? If it's not so clear, if it's foggy, and you think there is a forecast of a fog, call me at 1 a.m. So what I would do is that I would keep the phone right next to my pillow and wait for his call at 1 a.m. Most probably he will call at 1 a.m. So I would have my camera, my car would be ready with petrol, everything. And when I get a call, I would rush to Dubai. So everyone in Dubai would be trying to get out of the fog, and I would be the only one going into the fog. And most of the time, I wouldn't be able to see. I won't be able to see what's on the road. So I have to depend on a GPS. It's a dangerous thing, right? Driving into the fog. And then you reach the destination at maybe 3 a.m. and you need to call the manager, the watchman, and you're trying to get to the top of the building. So this happened 3 or 4 times for this shoot, where I ended up at the building, and when I went to the rooftop, the wind changed direction, which we couldn't predict, and the fog went the other direction. And I was on a rooftop with a cup of coffee, and we just stayed on the rooftop till 8 a.m. without any fog. So I did the routine again and again and again, and on the 4th day, I got maybe 20% of the footage that you just saw. So that is the level of, I would say, obsession. Passion, I think, is too mild of a word. You need to be really obsessed, so obsessed that your family might throw you out of the house. So it is important to have that level of obsession. And I say this because it's needed, not because I like to make things up. It is needed. So my next point would be story and vision. In this work that I've just showed you, the most important thing what I wanted to show was that there is a world in Dubai which we are not aware of, and it usually happens at around 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. and especially during the winter. When the fog comes in, most of us are fast asleep. I'm in Fujairah, so I don't see it anyway. So I wanted to show that to all the people in the UAE. That was my first aim. And the second aim was to show how modern Dubai was, and mostly inspired from the film Blade Runner. So most of the shots are sort of framed that way. So the film is basically to show an unseen Dubai and to show a Dubai which we are all very familiar with. So that was my story and the vision. And how do I go with the project plan? Now, project plan has two things. One is the artist in you. What does he want? What does she want? And the other part is technically, is it possible? I wanted to have a shot where there is a time lapse where the camera goes from one building to another, and you had fog underneath that. And the only way to do that would be to have a rope tied from one building to another and run a camera across with a motor. Not possible, right, in Dubai? So I said, no, that's not happening. And the second option was to do it using a drone time lapse. Again, that's not possible. My drone person said, you know what, you might just crash land because you're at the height of 80th floor. And I had to drop it. So these are the things. You have an artistic requirement, and you also need to look at from a technical point of view. Is it possible? If you have hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend, probably all those are possible, but I didn't have that. So there is a compromise between what's possible and what's not possible. So it's a compromise, really. So plan, shoot, plan. This comes only once you are absolutely sure of what you're shooting. Time lapse, again, I like to iterate. It is a very time-consuming process. It is so consuming that you lose track of time in a way, because for most of the sequence in there, 10 seconds of what you just saw in the film took me 4 hours to shoot. So that is a rough translation for that. So that is 4 hours of shooting time, and there is also another 2 hours of rendering and storing and the storage time basically. So every 10 seconds that you see in this film took me 6 hours to produce. That would be a rough estimate. So be very careful about what you shoot, because too often what happens is that you shoot something that looks pretty that day, but maybe that's not really needed for your film. So what do you do then? It's absolutely useless when it comes to edit. You do not need that footage. So only shoot what you're meant to shoot. Nothing else, nothing more. Minimal crew works, especially if you are shooting a lot of locations with the help of your friends, private locations, people who are giving you favors. You don't want to go into their house at 3 a.m. with a 20-member crew. That's not what you want. So go in minimal, go in with a couple of people at the max, shoot quickly, get out of the place. That's what I say. It's guerrilla. You need to go in, you need to get out. That's it. Get the shot that you want. Sponsorships and marketing are something I learned much later, because most of my films, I was the one who financed it. So it was my money. But that said, it's good if you can have some good sponsors, simply because you can always upgrade the equipment that you have. You can upgrade your marketing. You can probably get a couple of crew. You can get more permits, more locations. So yeah, those would be obvious anyway. The essentials of time lapse. So let's say today you are all going home and wanting to start a time lapse, wanting to do a time lapse, which will take probably 6 months. So what essentially would you need? What I keep telling people is that do not jump into time lapse right away. It's a mistake. You need to have a good understanding of still photography. I was a still photographer first, but it took me around 3 years or 2 years, I would say, to develop into a time lapse photographer, because I was making a lot of mistakes and I was learning it. Mistakes takes time. So have a good knowledge of still photography, because time lapse essentially is still photography multiplied by so many times. So if you are a good still photographer, you can translate that knowledge and success into a time lapse arena as well. Basic knowledge of composition, this is quite important, simply because of the fact that too often you are shooting something where there will be a change. Let's say, suppose you are shooting the sunset, right? Now, sun is a very dynamic entity. It moves its position. You are aware of the fact that in the next 30 minutes, the sun may not be in the position that you think it will be. It will probably be a little more to the right or to the left. You need to consider a lot of things when you do a time lapse, because the things in that frame can move. In Dubai, you do find that this is quite an important point, simply because of the fact that you have a lot of cranes in Dubai. if you are shooting a building which is under construction, most of the time make sure that in your frame there is room for the crane to move. Many times it has happened for me when I started shooting was that I never left the space for the crane in the frame. So what happened was after 10 minutes or so the crane moved and it went out of the frame. So it's so important to calculate everything that is in the frame that you need to anticipate that in the next 20 minutes that is going to move here. Because if you do that, you might get a really magical sequence. That is what I always try to do. I try to anticipate. You can't anticipate everything, but at least the 60% of what's in the frame you can. Rest of the 40, that's just your luck. Yeah. So the basic things that you need for a time lapse would be a tripod, a very good one, intervalometer. It's a machine. It's a small device basically, which triggers the camera to keep taking pictures over and over and over again. You need to say that give me 500 pictures at this setting, it would do that. It'll click 500 pictures for you. You don't need to touch the camera. You can just keep the settings in the right way and trigger the intervalometer. Camera and lenses. Now, ideally, I would tell all of you to have a full frame camera. That said, do not think that you can only make a time lapse with a full frame camera. That is a misconception. You can make time lapse with even your mobile, if you would have noticed already. And good lenses. It's preferable to have good lenses because when it comes to time lapse, there is a limit that you can sort of sharpen it, maybe post-process it in the post-production. So it's always good to shoot the whole time lapse with a sharp lens at probably the sharpest aperture, something around 7 to 11 or 7 to 12 would be a sweet spot for that wide angle panoramic sharp shot. One thing which people do not know most of the time, or no one has told them in most of these YouTube channels, would be that time lapse is great. You can do a normal time lapse with the first 3 points, but you still need a really good PC. You need a computer, a gaming laptop, or a PC which you have built which can handle a lot of rendering and processing. The reason I'll tell you, I can give you a comparison. The project that you just watched, it's around 6 TB of storage which had to be rendered with a lot of post-process and filters, right? It took me a week, 7 days on my computer to get that sorted, 7 days. My computer was on for 7 days, 24/7. And mine it's a custom built 64 GB machine, but believe me, all the fans were making noises at the end of the day. I thought my house would burn up by the end of this project. So if you are going for a time lapse, make sure that your system which you have at home, let it be a laptop, let it be a PC, let it be a Mac, it could be anything. Just make sure that it can handle some good deal of processing because it is intensive. Storage, lots of them. Why I say lots of them would be the fact that you need 6 TB of storage to store, but you also need a 6 TB to back up this 6 TB. So you need 12 TB essentially. Lot of storage, it is very costly that way. Monitor, a really good color calibrated monitor so that you don't mess up your shots. Shot division, it's very important to make sure that anytime that you're going to shoot, you have a list of things that you have already written down and planned where you're like, this is what I'm going to shoot on the day 3, and this is what I'm going to do on the day 4. Multiple batteries and memory cards. During winters, I've noticed that there is a crazy battery drain. So I went to a rooftop with just 3 batteries, and within the next 2 hours, 3 of them just died on me. And I didn't have any other go because I really didn't expect that. So I had to go back home, recharge, and come back, but that scene had changed. So after that, I started carrying around 6 to 7 batteries for a long shoot. It's really important because temperature affects batteries, and memory cards are also important. One of them could just get corrupted, and you would still need a replacement. So these are the essentials of time lapse, which all of you can just have it. You need these points simply because of the fact that without any one of them, you could really end up going in some other direction, and that would waste a lot of your time. There we go. So I kept saying that the most important part of the time-lapse film process is pre-production. Now you would ask me, why isn't the actual shooting not the most important? I think the actual shooting in a time-lapse is quite easy. In fact, even the post-production is quite easy. The most important part of time-lapse is pre-production. It's simply because of the fact that you would want to know what you're shooting at, the locations, when it comes to location. So what I usually do when I want to make a time-lapse video of a certain place is that I go through Google. I type whatever, if it's Dubai, I was typing best locations in Dubai, and Google will give me 3 pages of some of the best locations in Dubai, and 60% of them I don't think I'll be able to shoot because it's a private property, but I'll take the rest of the 40, and I would go to sites like best Instagrammable places in Dubai. So I would take all these very touristy, popular places, I'll make a list, and that's my first step. And the second step is the recce. What I do is that I'll try to find places which no one has seen. So I'll bring a set of places which everyone has seen. I'll bring a set of places which no one has seen, and I'm going to combine them. That is usually my process of getting all the locations in one cluster. That is what I said about location access study and location and story study. So it's important to know that the location that you are having is matching with your story. If you want to talk about an ultra-urban Dubai, you would want to be shooting somewhere around the Burj, right? You wouldn't probably want to shoot maybe Bur Dubai, which is an old Dubai. If you want to show heritage, old Dubai, you need to go there. So you need to know that your story matches with your location. Permissions in Dubai or anywhere in the world for that matter, you need to have those in place, because too often there is a security risk involved wherever you are shooting it, because this is most of the time can look like a huge setup. There could be a lot of rigging involved. So you need to have permissions. If from the local landowner, please do take it. It's better to take a permission, waste 1 month, than be caught. I was caught by the police once. What happened was that I was shooting, I think it was at Sharjah, somewhere near Sharjah port. I think it was a Khalidia port. So I was shooting the Islamic Museum, which is on the opposite side of the sea. I was shooting, the shooting was going well, so I took around 289 pictures, and I still remember the number because I was thinking, it'll be good to have 300 pictures. And I kept shooting. And I knew that something was going to go wrong because a man kept walking towards me, and apparently he was the CID. And he asked whether I had a permit. I did thankfully have a permit from the Sharjah Tourism Authority, but that place was restricted. So it doesn't matter sometimes if you have a permit. That place could just be a non-photography area. So he caught me. So he took me to the police station, and he looked at all my images. All the images looked the same because it was a time lapse. And it was pointed at the Museum of Islamic Civilization, who I was commissioned to work for. And he was very unhappy. He said, you know what, it's very disrespectful for you to shoot in this location. But I said, you know what, there was nothing sensitive about the whole shoot. But he said, you know what, I need to take this memory card. And he took an expensive memory card and let me go. So that was a lesson that I learned that day. It's better to take permits rather than lose an expensive memory card. So yeah, permissions are quite important. Storyboard I've been repeating over and over again, so it's the same thing. Production. This is mostly common sense actually, which I'm sure we all do follow. Reaching a place 1 hour early, look around. This look around is a point which I think holds a lot of value if you are especially shooting on top of rooftops. Most of the time, these rooftop images, you would see it on Google. You would see it on Google, you like that particular frame, you go to the exact particular frame and you try to shoot. But you do not look anything around you. Most probably there are better frames if you just look around you. So what I do is that I try not to go to the frame which is the most famous for. I try to walk around, try to get an idea of where I am. And most of the time it surprises me by giving me more frames, better frames in fact, and I end up getting additional shoot. So start setting up the equipment, which is quite obvious. Trial run, I do a trial run, and it's not because I'm not confident in what I do, but because of the fact that I want to test out my equipment, and I want to test out the lighting on how it looks on the raw images. That is why I always do a trial run of 10 or 15 images. I try to do a small time lapse, and using your viewfinder, I try to press next quite rapidly So you see these images passing by, and then you know that, oh, okay, this is how the time lapse is going to look in the long run. So it's important to do a trial run just to make you feel secure. Shoot time. Shoot time is basically you start shooting and shoot at the sharpest aperture. This was one of the mistakes I did in my first two time lapses, which I haven't shown to you. It was I tried to shoot it at 2.4, f2.4, f3.2. There was a lens which I had at f1.8. I was stupid enough to shoot at f1.8. So what happened was that on the camera viewfinder, it looked really sharp, and I was really happy with the image. But the moment I took it to the computer, there was only one point on the whole frame which was really sharp. Everything else was sort of like blurry. Now, if you are shooting a time lapse from a rooftop or you want to shoot a wide angle, try to shoot it at something like f7 to f12. It is the sweet spot for most lenses. Get the sharpest aperture and keep at it. Do not change that. And try to keep that aperture in most of your other shots also. Most of the shots in this film was shot at, I think, something around 8 to 10, somewhere between that, most of them. And you see that they are inherently sharp simply because of the fact that corner to corner they are sharp. Shoot at the most appropriate shutter speed and ISO. This is one mistake I've seen in people who have just started out time lapse. If you were shooting, let's say, a traffic scene, let's say somewhere in Dubai or Sharjah, you're just shooting a traffic signal, right? You have cars moving in and moving out. What people generally do is that they will shoot it at 1/250 or a 1/500, a quick shutter, right? A really fast shutter speed. That's what they would try to shoot. And once they have 250 images, what you generally see is that all the cars are really well defined. It looks like a block. It looks really sharp. And when you render it out, it looks very ugly, simply because of the fact that these cars looks like dots on the film, right? How to make that same scene better is by lowering your shutter speed. You can go to 0.5, maybe 1 second as your shutter speed length. So what that does is that it introduces something called a motion blur, which in a time lapse is really pretty. So what happens in this case is that you would start seeing that the cars would be in a sense of motion, and then they would stop at the traffic signal, and when they are moving again, they again have a motion blur. It looks much better on the eye if you have motion blur. Try to introduce as much motion blur as you can in your time lapses. It is by default pretty, and it also makes your time lapse look much more professional. So the ideal sweet spot for that, for a traffic or for people, would be somewhere like between 0 to 1 second. That would be your ideal sweet spot. And also shoot at the right ISO, because cranking up the ISO cranking up the ISO to extraordinarily high levels like a 3200 ISO does induce noise, but this noise gets significantly ugly when you render it out. So if you have one image with some noise, and in a time lapse there are, let's say, 240 images with different types of noise. Now you render out these 240 images, right? What you get would be 240 different types of noise, which looks like it is already moving on the screen. It moves on the screen. So try to keep the ISO low. Try to shoot clean. Yeah. And for shooting the traffic during the daylight, what I suggest to most people would be that to buy an ND filter. ND filter really helps you get some good time lapses, simply because here in Dubai there is way too much light, so you want to cut out the light going into the sensor. So get a good ND filter and make sure that you shoot at something like 1 second or something which is like on the slower side of it. Yeah. Guys, I think we are approaching a break. So I've been speaking. I think I'm at the halfway mark at my presentation as well. So I think we'll just take a break if that's okay with you. Right? Thank you. Is it 6 o'clock? Hello, hello. All good? Um, we have just finished this part of it. So let's go to the next part, which is to identify your friends when it comes to time lapse. You need a lot of friends, and these guys are your friends. These are softwares. These are tips, tricks, hacks, what you call it. Um, you need all of them to make sure that your time lapse goes smooth. Now, what exactly is a photographer's ephemeris? Now, this is an amazing application. It's a paid application. What it does is that it tells you where the sun is going to set, where it's going to rise, where is the moon going to be that day, what is the direction that it will be facing, what direction the sun's light would be. It is very technical application. If you give your GPS location to it, it can actually tell you which is the direction that you need to be looking for a sunrise or a sunset or even a moonrise. It is an amazing application, and for many times this has really saved me because I had no idea where the sun was going to rise, especially the exact point. Um, it is a paid application. It is a paid application. I think it's around 60 dirhams. It's 60 dirhams, I think. No, it's lifetime. Yeah. It's a really helpful application. There is another application which I'll come to. There is a time-lapse calculator. You'll get a free application on Android or iOS. This is really good because if you are in a situation where there is rain or a fog and your mind is really not working in calculating out the number of pictures that you need for a footage, this calculator really helps you with that. Overshooting. Now, this is not an application. It just means that shoot more. When I say shoot more, it just means that if you are shooting something for, let's say, 240 images, try to shoot, if you can, for 300 images. Maybe it stay there for 10 more minutes. This exact point is what got me arrested. So it comes with its own side effects. So what I'm trying to say is that shoot a little more, simply because of the fact that in your editing, you might get a little more room to play around with. Lens twist. This is a hack, basically. So someone has asked me about flicker. So flicker is something, it's a dreaded enemy, and you need to tackle this when you shoot and right after you shoot. So what is a lens twist? Now, lens twist is something where in a time lapse, your camera keeps clicking, right? 240 times, once, twice, thrice, it goes on. What happens is that the lens aperture doesn't close always exactly the same. So if you are shooting at f4, right, and you want to keep shooting for the next 240 pictures at f4, every time the trigger happens and the lens closes, the shutter triggers and the lens closes, it may not exactly land on f4.0 all the time. It could be f3.998 or it could be f4.03. So what happens is that if you take a sample, the lenses won't close exactly at the same point all the time. So what you do is that, this is a trick basically. Camera is what triggers the lens to operate its aperture, right? So what you do is that when you do a lens twist, it's basically you're disconnecting the electrical connection between the lens and the camera. So now your camera thinks that you are using a non-electrical lens. It means that you're shooting just a manual lens. So what happens is that if you keep the lens at f4 and then you do a twist, so now you break the electrical connection between the camera and the lens. Keep it right just like that. Do not move because it's really dangerous. The lens could go down and break. So keep it somewhere there and then start your sequence. So when your intervalometer keeps clicking, the aperture is now at f4 or f, let's say 4.01, but every picture will be at f4.01. So make sure you do this, but in Dubai, just make sure that it's not on a windy day because your sensor can get destroyed if you try this method. The dust can go in and you would need a cleaning after that. So if the condition is right and you think there may be a lot of flicker for a particular lens, use the lens twist. It saves you a lot of time in post-production where you avoid the flicker. And then comes the other hack, because I just spoke about aperture flicker. Now you also have a shutter flicker. So when it comes to shutter flicker, the shutter doesn't close, at least it doesn't slam the same way every time. There is a difference. So what we see is that this issue is quite common when it comes to higher shutter frames. If it's 1 by 50 or let's say 1 by 250 or 1 by 750, there is a chance that the shutter isn't hitting the same way all the time. So how to prevent that is you need to buy ND filters and make sure that you shoot mostly at much lower setting, which is like 1 by 10th of a second or maybe 0.3 of a second. So this means that you will to a larger degree avoid shutter flickering as well. So just by shooting correctly, you can sort of exclude and eliminate a lot of flicker in your footage. Flicker, I'm assuming that you know flicker. Flicker is basically these shimmering lights in every footage, which you need to eliminate for a much better visual experience. So lens twist will help you eliminate aperture flicker, and it will help you eliminate shutter flicker. And what is a star tracker? Star tracker is something if you are planning to shoot the North Star or the Milky Way or the Moon, or it could be Jupiter. This is a good application to download. It used to be known as Star Stack, I think, in iPhones, but now I'm not sure what it is known. But Star Tracker usually gives you a bunch of applications which you can track for. Most of them are paid, but it's absolutely worth it because you need those applications in a night sky where you have no idea from where the Milky Way is going to come up. So these applications will really save your day. Sandbags and ropes. If you are planning to shoot on the mountains, deserts, and in fact, rooftops mainly, you would need sandbags because the wind at the 95th floor is incredibly severe. Like it could blow you away, and which means that it could technically blow your camera also away. So what I've done for most of my sequence is that I had 3 sandbags and ropes, and I tied these 3 sandbags to my tripod. So even during such a wind, it doesn't move. So it's important to have solid weight, solid base for your tripod if you're shooting at high altitude, because it's really gonna play with your footage. It's gonna look bad. So be smart about that. And coffee and sleeping bags, again, when it comes to shooting on the rooftops, most of the time you may not get what you want to get. So bring a cup of coffee because there's a lot of driving involved, and a sleeping bag with you. So if you want to sleep with the footage, I mean with the camera taking the footage, so be it. Sleep there. These would be the LIs which you would need to count on. And also I would like to say a couple of things about flicker. I promised one gentleman here. Flicker can also be removed in post. Okay, it can be removed in post using an application called GB Flicker. It is a paid app. I think it comes to around 90 dirhams. It is a good app for you to remove post. If you are using a Premiere Pro, you can use that to remove it. But there are many other Flicker-free applications. Which there is an application called Flicker Free. Then there is a Sapphire Suite, which also has a bunch of these flicker removing softwares. Just a note: Flicker-free plugins require massive computing power. If your laptop isn't up to speed, if it just has maybe 8 GB of RAM, then please do not try Flicker Free on it. It will crash your entire workflow. Your Premiere will crash. Adobe After Effects would crash. It'll pretty much take everything in its way. So be very careful. You need to have a good system for you to use these applications. Flicker Free is one of them. Yeah. Too many times I've seen people with the right intentions, right plan, getting some really bad effects when it comes to time lapse. It usually comes in the form of bad tripods, flicker, which I've spoken to you about, shakes, wind. Wind is a problem, especially if you are using something like a 70-200 and shooting from a rooftop. You may not find it in the viewfinder, but what happens in a time lapse, right? If there are 240 pictures, and out of 240 pictures, maybe let's say 5 pictures gets blurry, your entire footage is not usable, simply because of the fact that you want all of them to be sharp. So for a larger, like a 70-200 or maybe something focal length of something more than that, you have to be very careful on what you're doing. Some of the shoots where I went, what I did was I took a custom built cardboard or a thermocol, like something of this height, and I kept right next to my camera. Now I had like me and my friend just holding it for the duration of the shoot, but what it did was that it took away the wind to a larger degree. It's important to be prepared for your shoot. Um, People, I've seen a lot of times that if you do not secure your shooting range, your shooting arc, people will enter the frame. They think that you are shooting for television, and they would try to come into the frame and probably give you a thumbs up. And that's exactly the thing which will ruin your footage. So make sure that you have two guys on either side of you trying to manage the crowd. It's really important because your time lapse takes 40 minutes or maybe an hour to roll again. Um, Faulty cables and connections. I've seen too many times the intervalometers cables are usually not of the highest standard. And if you bought a cheap one, which like I have, it's quite a cheap one, um, it causes a lot of issues simply because the pin can get damaged over a period of time. So what happens is that it takes one shot, it takes the second shot, it misses the third shot, and it takes the fourth shot. So this missed shot will look really ugly in your video. It's almost like you can't use your video. So be very careful. So in my head, I've sort of like programmed myself to listen for sound. The moment I don't hear a click or a beep of the camera, I know that I have missed the shot. So if there are 240 shots which are clicking, I'm usually near the camera, and in my head, I know that there is a shot which is going to happen right now. I wait for the shutter sound. So that is how you can sort of program yourself to take this. There are, for the rain, there are like, there is, I'm not sure of the device name, but there is a device right now. So it looks like an ND filter, but it's actually a high-speed rig which has air being hit on the lenses. So if there is rain hitting your lens, this device makes sure that it doesn't stay on the lens because there is a high-speed air circulation around the lens. It's quite expensive to buy, and probably you may not even need this in Dubai, but I just wrote for it. Yeah, and also the wrong intervals. Now, wrong intervals, there are two things basically. Someone asked me about the settings to shoot something, right? I'm sure a lot of you want to know about the settings. Now, when I say about wrong intervals, what it means is that if you are shooting, let's say, the sunset. Now, sunset by default is a long process. Maybe the sun starts its descent at 5 p.m. and by let's say 6:30, it has disappeared. For 1.5 hours, how do you shoot the sun, right? A lot of people I've seen go for a interval of 10 seconds or 12 seconds, which is quite a large interval between shots. Let's say I take a shot now, after 12 seconds only would I take the second shot. I always tell them that that's a mistake. Try to not go for that. The reason I say that is that in the 10 seconds, right, now sun wouldn't be your only subject. There would be people, there would be traffic, there would be kids playing around. If you keep a interval of 12 seconds, you do not, if a kid was there in the second one, the first picture, after 12 seconds, the kid would have gone somewhere. You wouldn't have any continuity between your frames. So what I keep telling people is that if you are shooting sunset, even though it will take a lot of your storage, try to shoot at something like 4 seconds or 5 seconds. 4 seconds is fine, absolutely fine. So that you have enough frames that in your post-processing, you can always tweak it however you want. Try to keep your intervals to such a degree that it is relevant. You do not need to save storage because you are in the field of time lapse. So it's expected that all of you have a lot of storage to burn, right? So make sure that your intervals are correct. Now, when it comes to shooting cars or a traffic on the road, if you've seen most of my time lapses at night, it was shot at something like, since I was really high, I needed that sort of an interval for the car. The car would be really small for it to go from point A to point B. It was around 5 seconds. Most of my time lapses from the rooftops of traffic was somewhere between 2 seconds to 5 seconds. That was the setting, and I tried to keep most of my ISO below 1600, simply because of the fact that I knew that there would be a lot of noise. Thankfully, I was shooting with Canon 5D Mark IV, so they were very nice to give me those cameras the moment they were released. So I got a good camera, but even then, it's very important to keep your ISO under control. And thankfully, I had some good lenses also, so most of the night sequence I handled it that way. That said, there was a shot of Dubai Abra and the traffic near Dubai Abra. And you would have, if you have noticed, I can probably play the movie at the end of the session. You would have noticed that the car streaks were really long. That was simply because the area was really bad. It was badly lit. Some of the street lights were not working. Some of the lights weren't there. So I shot the whole film, shot the whole sequence at around 10 seconds. Every picture that you see in that sequence had a 10-second exposure. And that's why you have a really long trail of cars. So just to compensate for the light. So I can give you a list of general values, but that said, when a location presents itself, make sure that you improvise. You do not need to follow what I just said, because our environment, our situations can change drastically because it's a time lapse, right? So yeah, that's the thing with wrong intervals. It's very important to make sure that you get what you wanted in the right way. Things to not do in a time lapse. Let's look at these. Shoot in JPEG. This is like the most common mistake. It's the most easiest mistake to make, because all of your cameras actually come in the setting where the default setting is shoot in JPEG. It's not to shoot in RAW. And that's how it is, because for a camera company, they would always want the users to shoot in JPEG, because shooting in RAW means you need to have a software to open that. It's a lot of hassle for a common user. So always the setting is JPEG, and the people go out and shoot in JPEG. Most of the JPEG that you shoot would be 8-bit. 8-bit is hardly much depth. However, the RAW that you are shooting would be, I think, around 12 to 14 bits. So it's quite a difference between JPEG and RAW. So always shoot in RAW. If you just want to learn the basics of time lapse, fair enough, you can shoot in JPEG. But if you want to go to the next step towards an intermediate level, please do shoot in RAW. It's really important, because you would see the difference in the post. Shoot automatic. Please do not shoot automatic. It's very easy. It's really easy. I've seen people do that. It does two things, actually. If you think that your intervalometer triggers an automatic setting, there are two things that can go wrong, and it always goes wrong, is a variable shutter speed. It always tries to shoot in a variable shutter speed. So each of your pictures will look distinctively different, because your camera doesn't know that you are doing a time lapse. Only you know that you are doing a time lapse. So for the camera, every picture is a standalone picture, and it will treat it that way, and it will also change the ISO. Wrong shutter speed. Wrong shutter speed is again what I just explained earlier. It's that was the interval. So shutter speed is basically if you have a 700 mm lens pointing at the sun. Now the sun, you would know for a fact that if you are looking through a 700 mm lens or a 600 mm lens, it dips to the horizon really fast. It's really fast. The sun moves rather quickly. So for such a scene, for you to get the sun like a spear, you need to make sure that you shoot at a much higher shutter speed. It could be 1/100, or it could be 1/200. But some people, what they do is that they would want to, they want more light, so they compensate and go to 1/20. At 600 mm, you would see a blur. You would get a motion blur if you try to shoot the sun that way. And you don't want to see the sun that way, right? You want to see it like an absolute circle. So you need to shoot at the proper shutter speed for each situation. And I am someone who shoots variable when it comes to clouds. The cloud shot of the Burj Khalifa that you just saw earlier, it was shot at, I think, 1/20, and it had like an ISO of around 1500, and I believe the aperture was like quite low as well. Now the reason I shot at 1:25 was I didn't want it to be too blurry. At the same time, I didn't want it to be too sharp. I wanted to introduce slight motion blur to it, because that day there was a lot of wind in the air, so the clouds were moving rather fast. So at 1:10 maybe you might get a slight motion blur. So you need to know what you want to achieve and what you want to show it in a film. If you want slight motion blur, make sure that the setting reflects that. Yeah. So just do not follow anyone's advice on how to shoot something, because it's your film at the end of the day, not their film. Always have that identity among yourself. Mix actions at different speeds. This is what I said about sunset and people. Framing plants or water in the foreground. Lot of times I've seen people having a lake in the foreground and a skyline in the background. It is the worst thing to do, and I'll tell you why. Water is the most distracting thing in a time lapse, because it has no form, it has no direction. It looks just random in every image that you see. So please do not try to have plants if there is a lot of wind and water in your time lapses. Try to avoid them as much as you can. There is a trick to have water and still get away with a time lapse, is to use longer exposures. You can have 2-second exposures for all your pictures. So what happens is that 2-second exposure sort of evens out the roughness in the water. So water will look like a plain marble. It will just look like a plain marble, and it wouldn't be so distracting. So that is a hack, but that is not the preferable way to do it, right? So if possible, avoid the most distracting things in your film or the frame out of your film altogether. Focusing only on movement. So what that means is that sometimes we just get so overwhelmed with shooting something very particular. Let's say if it's a train in a train station, we keep as a time lapse. I can tell you that most of the time we are very narrow-minded. We go to a location, we only want the certain thing that we want, and we try to get out. Too many times what I've seen is that I have missed things which I haven't looked for. So in a train station, one fascinating thing would be people cleaning the train station. There would be people sweeping across. That would be a fascinating subject in a time lapse. But you are so focused on getting the trains coming into the station that you totally forgot about the guy who's cleaning the station. So there is a narrative there. So try to look for alternative narratives. Yeah. Abusing camera movements. Just because you have a really fancy slider rig doesn't mean that you need to use that in every shot. Movement is to tell a story. Movement is to tell a perspective. Please do not go into the whole, the way of filmmaking of going from point A to point B and point Z to point C, just like that. Because what is your story? Your story needs some sort of a perspective. You can't move from A to B just like that. So every movement that you introduce in your time lapse, let there be meaning. Let there be a story. You are trying to tell a story to the audience. So before you add a movement to any shot, think to yourself, do I really need it? Is it adding anything into my film? If not, don't. No one's gonna blame you. They're happy that you're doing a work. It also comes with the fact that these days you have these osmos and much easier way of shooting things. So people are thinking that that's like the coolest way of doing it. It is really cool, but in a video, it is really cool. So yeah, know your limits. Know the limits of your art, what you're doing. Retouching excessively is a common problem. Increasing the saturation bar or going all guns blazing on all those sliders over there in Lightroom, that is a really that's a crime really, because you spend so much time and effort in getting a location and shooting something really difficult, and in the last step of the process you go ahead and screw that all up. So be moderate in what you do, whether it be shooting and whether it be in the post, right? Try not to buy new equipment before travel. It's the biggest advice I can give to you. We all love spending money on equipment, fancy new gear. Try not to, because before you travel, that's when you are at your most vulnerable self, where you have no idea how this equipment is going to work. So just make sure that you try to bring your comfort zone along with you and not try to do something really fancy. Um, Submit your work for free in exchange for credit. You know what I'm talking about. I just put this here simply because I want all of you as artists to know your worth. It is not worth to give your hard-earned work, hard-shot work to someone else for free. It is really do not need that. Yeah, so these would be the things to not do in a time-lapse project. Um, I'll go to post-production. So some of you had doubts, and I'll actually tell you more on what post-production is all about. First, you need to have multiple backups of the whole footage, and the second would be raw processing. I spoke to few of you today, and what I've come to know is that you guys do use JPEGs, not raw. It is important to use raw simply because the flexibility that you get in post-production is really good, and the visuals that you're taking really does reflect that quality. JPEG would not give you that quality. So how do I render my time lapses? So you might be interested to know my workflow. When I started out my time lapse, I was using Lightroom with a plugin called, yeah, it's basically Lightroom with a Lightroom time lapse light. It's called LRT. You must have heard of it. It's called Lightroom time lapse. It's done by a guy called Gunther Wegner. He's a German guy, so he made this software where he added a plugin of render engine and a video engine to the Lightroom. So he retrofitted Lightroom with these things. So what it made Lightroom something which can take all your images and convert them into video after editing. It was such a cool software, and that's what I used when I started out time lapse. But the issue with that was that it took a lot of processing time, and it was rather slow, and it wasn't really working out for me. So what I do these days is that, so once I shoot all the images, let's say I have 240 images, I go to Adobe After Effects. And there is an option called Import. In Import, when you click on the first raw file that you shot, right, Adobe will ask you a question. Oh, so you mean to say that, is this a time lapse sort of a question it will ask you, and you say yes. So what it does is that it by default, it takes all the 240 images and tells you that create a composition out of it. And you need to right click on that new composition and say create a composition. So that will create internally a video. It doesn't render it out, but now Adobe thinks that this is a video, not a bunch of pictures. Once I do that, you can actually set the resolution that you want to export it to. And you can also do some minor color corrections on the raw. You can edit on the raw. It's like a metadata which says this is the color that I want to export it out. So all my color corrections for this film was done in Adobe After Effects. Once the color correction is done, I drag this footage, composition, and put it into something called a render queue. In the render queue, I make sure that I give out the highest quality. And in this case, I think it was QuickTime. It was QuickTime. It was Cineform QuickTime. Cineform QuickTime is the equivalent of ProRes, which is basically lossless video, transcoding. If you're aware of transcoding, that's what it is. So I've rendered out all of them in Cineform. So in the render engine, I click on the thing called render, and Adobe After Effects converts all these images into a video with all your color corrections done. And now I have a very heavy file which mostly can't be played on your PC. It'll be a 9 GB or a 10 GB file for a 10-second video, and it'll be super heavy, and that's what it'll be. It'll probably be an MP4 or a .mov. That's the format. That's like a pure, it's not technically raw because I've transcoded it, but it's near raw. It's that good. And you won't be able to play it on your system, right? So what I do is that once I have 10 or 15 of these videos done, I drag all of them and bring them into something called Adobe Premiere Pro, which is again an editing software, right? So in the editing software is really powerful now for it to read this. It can read this. In the editing, that's when I would drag and drop the music and then edit on top of the music. So I would take all these 10 or 50 or 80 sequences, make sure that if it's fitting my vision, I edit it completely. It'll usually take a month or so. because I'm looking at different settings, right? So in Premiere Pro, I would do the final color correction. That is where I do the final color correction. Whatever I've done in Adobe After Effects was the first time I'm doing it. Second time is done in Premiere Pro. And this is where I add the plugins for deflicker, any extra color correction, including sharpness. Some of the times what happens is that in Dubai, when you shoot from a rooftop, you have a lot of haze in the air. It's not so clear. So you need to add filters, some really heavy filters like colorize. You need to add more contrast. You need to add more sharpness just to have that eye-popping sharpness in your picture. So I've added all that. I've added sharpness in it. I've also added a plugin of deflicker to it because I want to remove all that in the post. Now, once all that is done, now the edit is logged, I click on something called render again in Premiere Pro. This is when the Premiere Pro takes maybe 5 or 6 or maybe 8 days to render it out. Your computer has to be on for 8 days throughout, and it takes that much time to render out a 4-minute video from 60B data. Because the reason it's taking so much time is because your sharpening plugin, your flicker plugin, takes a lot of computing power. And this is where you need to add all these plugins. So this is the post production for a time lapse. So when you're exporting this, this is something I want to tell you is that when you are exporting a 4K file, a 4K time lapse especially, make sure that you upload anywhere between 50 to 120, preferably 80 MB per second. You would get a gigantic file like a 10 gig file, but that's the right way to export it. If it's an HD file for YouTube, 16 bytes per second, 16 MB per second would be the right rate. But if you really want a high quality file, you would need something on the lines of 80 to 120. This film was exported at 160. I didn't need to, but I thought, you know what, I spent 3 years anyway. So it's exported at 160. So yeah, that is something with the bit rate. So you get a really high bit rate, and with that you can upload to YouTube or any other platform. It would do its own compression, but that said, the compression would be little less because you are uploading such a high quality file. If you upload a low quality file, YouTube is going to penalize you because you're uploading a low quality file. So how the algorithm works is that if you upload a 4K file, YouTube will process it at 10-bit. But if you upload HD file, it will only process it at 8-bit. So try to always upload a 4K file onto YouTube because their algorithm is much kinder to you if you upload a 4K video. And they actually have algorithms which penalize you for uploading 720p or HD video. They will penalize you. They'll bring down your quality much more. Upload a 4K video if possible, right? I'm getting to the end of my presentation anyway. This is basically the reinvention of the medium. I've been speaking about time-lapse for a long time now. What I want to tell each one of you would be that when you are undertaking an artwork and trying to get a time-lapse sorted, try to think of something new, something that you can add as part of your own signature. It's important because every art form, this is a very niche art form, not many people are doing it. Even though you would see a lot of videos on the YouTube, it's not much compared to the other videos. So it's important that you push the boundaries and come up with something really fancy, something new, something a little bit different. And this is when I felt some work like Watchtower of Turkey by Leonardo D'Alessandri. If you see that video, it's a mix of time lapse, it's a mix of hyperlapse, it's a mix of aerials. It has conventional video in it. It has photography in it. So that was something unique I felt. So yeah, what next for me? I'm not totally sure about it because I've gone so much into now filmmaking and all that. Hopefully, Imagine Dubai 2 sometime soon. So the next would be one question which some people have asked me is, how do you sell time-lapse? Do you make money out of time-lapse? It's a valid question, right? You spend 3 years on a rooftop. Do you even make money out of it? Short answer is not really. I just got this chance here. That's the high point of this. So, so how it works is that usually all these footages which I've just shown you, there are two ways to sell them. One would be to corporate entities who would just buy it, like 10 sequence of them, and you charge them a flat rate. And the other one would be to sell it on a social platform like a Shutterstock or there are many video blogs and all those. Yeah. Uh, Now, my advice to you is that try not to sell it on the stock websites. It's because you as an artist have spent so much effort and time in getting those done that you are actually devaluing your own market and your value. So whatever you needed thousands of dollars, you are actually selling it for $15. And someone at the click of a button just bought your hard-earned work. So try to keep your exclusivity up, not sell your footage. Give it to good clients, make money out of it. I'm all in for it. But try not to sell on stock websites. It's good for the market. It's good for all of us. Time to get alive, go back home, warrior. Like that's the last thought when I finished my final shot of it. Other than that, yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. So I just wanted to ask you your doubts, questions. If you want to know a particular setting, it could be any part of anything really. So you have. So I'll just go one by one. Go for it.
I did some time lapses, especially from day to night or night to day. So this is the most challenging thing. I mean, if you are shooting a sunset, let's say,
Right.
and you kept your setting for the the sun. Now, when the sun goes down and it's dark, the whole footage will be dark.
Yes, yes. So I'll explain the process on how to shoot a day to night time lapse, and that is what you call usually a holy grail time lapse, because it's the most toughest part of a time lapse. When I shoot a day to night time lapse, so you usually involves a sunset, yeah, 4 to 7 o'clock, 4 to 7 o'clock ideally, yeah. So when I start at 4 o'clock, it's really bright. The sun is up there, and the light keeps going down and down and down because the sun is now setting, right? So what I do is that I look at the camera, the viewfinder. Right above the viewfinder, you have a small display, right? And you have a light meter. So what I try to ensure is that the light meter is always -1 stops. It's always -1 stops. So the arrow is always pointing to the -1 stop. So what happens is that if it changes, now the light is dropping, suddenly it becomes -1.5 stops because the light is going down, right? So what I do is that the moment I see that, I turn the shutter speed to the right. I adjust the shutter speed, right? So now the arrow again goes back to 1. It was 1.5 because the light is dipping. Once I changed it, it goes to 1 again. And I make sure that I allow 4 frames of that same light to continue. So now it's on 1, so I allow 4 more clicks of the camera, right? Then, so why I say this, there is a reason why. The reason why I say is that LR time-lapse, the time-lapse program invented by the German, the algorithm inside that is that it looks for exposure shifts, right? And for it to manually, as in automatically smoothen the curve, it requires 4 frames. So every time I do an exposure shift, I wait for 4 more frames before I make any other change. So the software recognizes that, okay, this guy has made a change, and I know where the change is. Because the moment you load these images into his software, you actually get a graph like that. And everywhere where you have changed the exposure, you see a red dot. So what I do is, so once you have this sorted out, so once, let's say, it has gone into the night, right? I would keep, then it becomes more aggressive. After maybe every 2-3 minutes, I need to keep doing the shift, right? So you have a very flicker-full footage. You need to drag and drop this into LR time-lapse by Gunther Wegner. Once you drag and drop into it, the software automatically corrects this thing. It asks you, do you want a smooth transition or do you want a more dramatic transition? Most of the time, smooth works. So you press smooth. It automatically, it increases the exposures and decreases the other. It averages it out. And that is how you get a smooth time-lapse. So this is the technique behind that. In fact, the scene of Burj Khalifa going from day to night was done using this method. So I was on the building. I was manually changing the exposure. And that's what the only thing you need to be careful is that just make sure your hand doesn't shake the shot. So be very careful there. But this is the technique, right? And also make sure that you apply a flicker-free plugin on top of his footage. So you have 2 layers of flicker-free running on the same footage. So that means that you won't have flicker. So that is the idea. So,
hi, good evening. My question is, you said we can even remove the flicker through Adobe Premiere Pro.
yes.
Like what step, is there any specific plugin which we need to?
Yeah. There is something called GB Deflicker.
Okay.
GB Deflicker is a paid software. I think it's around $70. Once you buy that software for Adobe Premiere, in your Adobe Premiere Pro, there is something called effects.
Yes.
In your effects, if you search, you'll get this GB Deflicker.
Okay.
So you need to drag and drop on your footage. So the plugin, right? It analyzes internally and removes the flicker.
Okay.
And there is also a software called Flicker Free.
So it's not a built-in one from
No,
Premiere
they
Pro.
don't have. And their built-in one actually creates more problem than what already is. So try not to use what's built in.
Okay.
I've tested that.
Thank you.
Guys, any more questions? Yeah.
Excuse me, my question, like you told us about the battery. About the battery.
Yes.
Like last year, I'm shooting the Milky Way, but less than 1 hour the battery finish.
Yeah, that's
so
because.
what's the procedure? I can change the battery or
Yes.
what?
Were you shooting at Jebel Hafid or Jebel Jais maybe?
No, in Dubai Al Qudra Lakes.
Al Qudra. It was very cold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. If you go to Jebel Jais or all these locations, right, it's really cold. So your batteries are not really designed for that, especially the batteries which we get in the market. So they drain at maybe 50 or 60% more faster than what it's supposed to be. So there is a way. There are 2 ways, in fact. Some people I've seen have battery packs connected, hardwired to your camera. It lasts for a long time. So you need to remove your battery. You need to remove the flap, and you have these custom-made plugs which goes in, right? And it is connected to a hardcore heavy battery, heavy-duty battery, and that stays for hours. You could just keep there. But this is at the severe side of it. But other than that, if you are shooting a Milky Way, my suggestion would be that carry a lot of batteries and make sure that your interval, right, between the shots is in such a way that you can actually change the next battery. So that's how I shot it. So I didn't go for the heavy duty one.
Thank you.
For making a nice time lapse for amateur people, for example, what do you recommend? To let the camera control everything as time lapse, or we take the intervals and the pictures, then we use the Lightroom or any software to do that?
It is a mixture of everything. It is a mixture of everything. Simply just because I took a lot of nice images doesn't mean it's going to come out really well, because there is a lot of post-processing also involved in this project. But that said, the reverse is also true. Just if I take a bad picture, there is no way I'm going to correct that in the post. So what I would always tell people is that shoot correct, shoot right, shoot traditional. You don't need to be very fancy. Just shoot right way. And even if your post-production is minimal, you still get a good result. Yeah, so that's what it is. It is about keeping it simple. Yeah.
Thank you.
Guys, anyone else?
While shooting from day to night, so in the daytime the white balance should be warm, right? If you will change, like how you deal with that thing with the white balance, because from going warm to cool, how you deal with that?
So what I do is that I try to keep a neutral white balance manually for both day and night. I don't change the white balance. Because you are shooting in RAW, white balance really doesn't matter, because you're going to change it in post. But if you're shooting in JPEG, yes, it matters. So I don't really care what is the white balance. What I do in post is that, because in in Dubai, we would like to see Dubai more bluish than orange, and days as more orangish. What I do is that in Premiere Pro, you can always do something called, you can track it. You can track the change. So you can make sure that your days, the white balance is in this way. As soon as at some critical point, which is going to night, you can start changing the values of your white balance to bluish. So you can manually do that in post. So I try to keep a very neutral. And also one point would be that I also tell people would be, try to keep the internal sharpness of the camera as 0. So if your camera has internal sharpness setting as maybe 2 or 3 or very sharp, it introduces flicker in your video. And while you are rendering this time lapse out, try to not play so much with contrast, sharpness. These are the two things you should not, you can play with it. But the moment you touch those, it introduces something called artifacts. These artifacts are basically flicker, weird objects in your footage. That is what this is. So try not to touch sharpness and contrast. So yeah.
Hey, so my question, so I'm a travel content creator, and recently, like a lot of the travel videos you see, maybe New York or Tokyo or even like Abu Dhabi going to the Grand Mosque, I'm not sure if those are hyperlapses or time lapses when they go through the door and they keep moving and whatnot. So I guess my question to you is like, what exactly is the difference between time lapse
They
and
cheat.
hyperlapse?
I'll tell you how.
Yeah.
They cheat. What they do is that they take a video. They take a normal video, right? They take a normal video like a guy doing that, and he goes into something called a frame grabber. I think there is a software called a frame grabber. He converts a normal video into time lapse. So since he is moving, he's taking a video, right? So you have like a lot of frames every second, correct? So this software, what it does is that it takes a frame from every second. So he cheats, basically. He doesn't take a time lapse. He takes a video, he converts it into a time lapse, and you would get the same effect. So that's what he does. So suddenly, for those minute sort of cuts and giveaways in a travel video, you get these. It feels like it's rushed, fast, gives you that moment. So they don't have time. These travel bloggers don't have time to take a time lapse. I know that. So they usually take a video and then convert it in post. Now, no, he doesn't have. No, because I know the logistical challenge of that. If he is releasing a video every day, there is no way he's going to take a hyperlapse. For me to take a hyperlapse with so much experience, it's going to take me 3 hours. So I don't think a travel blogger will have that much time just to take one sequence, because his video will be really rich with a lot of things of him speaking and a lot of locations. So this is what they do. They cheat.
Hey. Hi.
Hi.
My question is, your all-time shooting is a manual, or is the aperture priority also using?
It's always manual. It's always manual because the moment I give some control to the camera, it introduces artifacts, and usually it will change its own settings. So I'll try to keep it manual, always manual. That would be the thing, yeah.
Another question. You told us like how many pictures you need to take, depends on the scene what you watch.
Okay.
Like for example, I want in this scene 10 seconds for time lapse.
Okay.
So how many pictures I want to go? Especially you told us like maybe the movement of cars, maybe to be slow, fast.
Oh, okay, okay. So you mean to say that to give you some examples of different scenes and how many pictures you need to take of that scene?
Like if I need 10 seconds of this scene.
Of this room?
No, I think like
Okay, anything. Okay,
like
got
cars
it.
are like this.
Okay, so usually a traffic scene, the traffic in Dubai. Okay, I'll tell you this. There are two ways. Let's take a rooftop scene because that was the most common here, right? Suppose you are at a 30th floor rooftop, right? And you are shooting what's below you. An ideal time would be around 4 seconds exposure, 2 seconds gap, 4 seconds. 4 second shot means that you'll get a nice trail of traffic. 2 seconds you're not shooting at all. That's the gap, that's the interval. You shoot again. This is usually the way I do. I try to keep the gap between two shots minimal because I usually end up getting a much smoother, continuous time lapse. And that is quite important, I think. Because too many times we think of a dramatic effect, and what we say is that we'll shoot a photo now, after 5 seconds we'll shoot the next photo. But that's a big gap. Your video will look so jittery, like it doesn't look good, you know. So that is for a rooftop, right? Now, if I'm shooting a desert with a cloud, right? Now, if the cloud is moving really slow, right, really slow, I would keep an interval of 5 seconds, simply because it's moving damn slow. But if it's moving really fast, I would again keep a shutter of maybe 1 second difference only, because it's moving really fast. I want to capture all of that. So that would be the difference. It depends on your subject, how quickly the subject is moving, and how much of that you want that in your video. So if it's about a small traffic junction, I would say 3 seconds is great, because most of our traffic signals here are around 40 seconds or 35 seconds, sort of somewhere there. So if you keep 3 seconds short plus 1 second interval, 3 second short, you will get all these cars staying there at the traffic for maybe 10 frames. So it's nice. It feels like the cars are just coming in, staying there, then going out. You get all that. But if you keep a much bigger interval, like a 10 seconds, you wouldn't see the car going out of the traffic signal. So
all that you can do it by, you told us the equipment, like there's the external remote, so you can put the interval.
yes, your intervalometer, you just, but before you start that, it's important to make that calculation in your head.
Yeah.
That is the most important, because you should decide how it should look in the film. Yeah.
Okay.
My question: can you shoot the same thing on a different date? Meaning, let's say a construction site that takes 3 months or 1 year or 2 years. Can you shoot today like 200, 300 pictures and then go home, sleep, and come back after 1 week or after 3 days, go to same locations, but definitely the tripod and the camera won't be the same frame. So does that affect after in post, or do you usually do that, or it's banned, like one of the things that you should never do?
No, it is.
You got me right.
Yeah. So what you said, it's possible. Technically, it is possible. Yes.
Because I mean, a tower construction that takes like 1 year or 2 years.
Yes.
How do you shoot it?
So how it works is that my time lapse that you just saw right now is called a short-term time lapse. Even though I took 2 years, that's not the case. How much your sequence takes, that is the duration of a time lapse, right? So mine is what you call a short-term time lapse. The one you mentioned is what you call a long-term time lapse over a period of 2 years or so. So there is something called a long-term time lapse setup. It's around 15,000 dirhams. It is basically a big box with a camera, and it has a 4G connection and a solar panel and its own built-in 3 batteries. So it basically is for your long-term thing. So you have a pole, you need to clamp it, and it takes it. So every 10 pictures it takes, it'll send by 4G to whichever may be the owner of the building.
So we cannot use our standard camera.
It is the standard camera inside that casing.
So we have to buy the box
yes,
itself.
Yes. Otherwise, you know, something will change. Maybe the wind will change a bit. Maybe a worker will change a bit. You can't just use a tripod.
Without the box, it cannot be done?
It can be done, but it will be moving. You know, the tripod will move a little bit. Yeah, that you can't correct in post-processing. Yeah, you have to shoot it right. So
you wouldn't recommend it?
I worked once, but that time I had a box.
Okay.
Yeah, so we always get the box because it's good for everyone, the client and the people. You get a good stable shot.
I have one more question about the framing. So when I did an aerial time lapse or hyperlapse, you know that when you shoot a raw, it's a 3x2. So if you want to convert it to 16:9 at the end, because it's a video,
yeah.
So the frame size is different. So is there any trick to do it in the post, or I should keep more distance so that when I crop it, I have the frame I want?
It's cropping actually. In fact, I made the same mistake for my first film, where this film is 16:9. That's the ratio. If ever you are shooting a time lapse, try to shoot it at 16:9. That's the widescreen ratio. I shot it at 3:9. So what happened at that point was someone told me that if you shoot it at 3:2, you can do pan up because you get more headroom, right? And I listened to that advice, and it wasn't great. simply because I had to do a lot in post to get that thing done. So my suggestion would be that, yes, for your particular case, you need to crop that. You need to cut the borders, the top and the bottom, or at least the one bottom.
So I have to imagine the
yes. Usually
the
what
frame.
people do is that they put a black tape on the
Yeah.
screen,
Yeah.
and that's how they shoot. So, but that said, try to shoot 16:9 if possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
How we can shoot the same scenery under different weather conditions, especially when there are thunder and storms?
It's tricky. Usually we carry an umbrella, and that's also not really, it's dangerous because camera attracts lightning. It's very risky, especially if you are on a helipad with storm. My personal suggestion is get out of there. Don't shoot. But if you are not on the rooftop, maybe, if you are maybe on the side of it, you can technically. Yeah, it might be okay. But even then, when I shoot, I tell my friends maybe is that try to stay away from the camera. Let the camera run its course because you are hearing the clicking sound. After that, go and take it.
How if it's raining?
We usually have a cover. You get covers with these lenses or the camera. You get those lenses. To an extent, it works. Some of these Canon cameras, they are like waterproof. Doesn't mean that water doesn't go in. It's just the initial rain, it sort of holds up. But that said, you can't take too much shots. Yeah.
Hi. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So your final rendering is doing the FPS is 24 or 25 or 60?
Oh, good question. That's a good question. Mine is 24. Yes. If you want a
all videos doing is
all of them, because if one is 27, one is 26, and one is 24, your final render is going to look really ugly. So be very consistent with that. If you want a little bit of a cinematic jitter, keep it at 23.976. That is what most films are run on. Yeah. So 24 is like a more nicer part of that. Thank
you. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I hope, guys, we meet you maybe next week. We will have another, it is workshop, and there will be on Friday a lecture, and on Saturday there will be a photo walk. Please join us. This will be travel portrait photography, and let's go out to have a group photo and take your certificates. Thank you very much, and good night.